Welcome, dear listeners, to another descent into the abyss that is the shadow behind you. I am your guide through the forgotten corridors of history, where the veils between the living and the dead grow thin, and the whispers of the damned claw at the edges of your sanity. Tonight, we venture into the mist-shrouded hollows of Appalachia, that ancient spine of the earth, where mountains rise like the hunched backs of forgotten gods, and secrets fester in the soil like unhealed wounds. The year is 1878, a time when the industrial maw of progress began to gnaw at these timeless hills, but the old ways, the primal, unforgiving rituals, still held sway in the shadows. Imagine, if you will, the chill of an autumn fog rolling down from the peaks, wrapping around your ankles like spectral fingers, pulling you deeper into the underbrush where light dares not tread. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, mingled with the faint, acrid tang of coal smoke from distant mines. In these remote valleys, life clings tenaciously to the rocky slopes, but death is a constant companion, lurking in the collapsed tunnels, the fevered bedsides, and the sudden silences of the night. It is here, in a forsaken corner known as Thorn's Hollow, that our tale unfolds. A macabre symphony of sorrow, sin, and the insatiable hunger that bridges the worlds of flesh and spirit. They called them the Thorn Sisters. Eliza, the elder, with eyes like polished obsidian that seemed to swallow the light, and Abigail, her shadow, frail and ethereal, her voice a whisper that carried on the wind like a lament. Born into a lineage cursed by the mountains themselves, these women were midwives to the dying, tenders of the departed. But whispers spread like wildfire through the undergrowth, tales of coffins that weighed less than the wood they were hewn from, bodies that vanished into lightness, as if the very essence of the dead had been consumed. The sisters who fed the dead. The villagers murmured in hushed tones around flickering hearths, crossing themselves against the evil eye. What did they feed them? And why did the graves in Thorn's Hollow hum with an unnatural emptiness? As the moon climbs high over the jagged ridges, casting elongated shadows that twist like tormented souls, I invite you to lean closer to the fire. Feel the warmth on your skin, a fleeting barrier against the encroaching cold. For in this episode, we unearth a story buried deep in the annals of Appalachian lore, where the line between mercy and monstrosity blurs into oblivion. What if the dead hungered not for peace, but for something far more primal? What if the sisters, in their isolation, discovered a ritual that lightened the load of the grave, at a terrible cost? Listen well, for the shadows behind you grow longer, and they are listening too. Let us begin with the hollow itself. Thorn's Hollow, nestled in the folds of the Blue Ridge Mountains, was a place where time moved sluggishly, like molasses in winter. The year 1878 marked a turning point for Appalachia. The railroads snaked through the valleys like iron serpents, bringing miners and merchants, but also disease and discord. In Thorn's Hollow, however, the old blood ran thick. The inhabitants, descendants of Scots, Irish settlers, and Cherokee fugitives, clung to superstitions as fiercely as they did their rifles. Mirrors were covered at death to prevent the soul from trapping itself in reflection. Clocks were stopped to mark the eternal pause, and cats were shooed from the deathbed lest they steal the departing breath. It was amid this tapestry of fear and faith that the Thorn family took root. Their cabin, perched on a precarious ledge overlooking a chasm of fog-choked pines, had stood since the early 1800s, weathered by storms that howled like banshees. Legend whispered that their ancestor, a granny witch named Eloin Thorn, had bartered with the spirits of the mountain for knowledge forbidden to mortals. She could cure the ague with herbs plucked under a full moon, or curse a rival's crops with a single glance. But such power came with a price. The family line was blighted, births rare and fraught with peril. By 1878, only Eliza and Abigail remained, orphans of a fever that had claimed their parents a decade prior. Eliza, at 32, was the pillar, tall, sinewy, her hands calloused from digging roots and tending graves. Her hair, black as raven feathers, was always bound in a severe knot, and her dresses, homespun and faded, hung like shrouds. Abigail, 5 years her junior, was her opposite. Delicate, with skin pale as birch bark and eyes that darted like frightened deer. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried the weight of prophecy. Together they eked out an existence as herbalists and, increasingly, as tenders of the dead. In a region where undertakers were scarce, the sisters washed bodies, sewed shrouds, and prepared coffins with a reverence that bordered on the obsessive. But it was the lightness that first stirred the unease. It began subtly, in the spring of 78, when old Jebediah Crow succumbed to the black lung after years in the nascent coal seams. His family called upon the sisters. As was custom, they arrived at dusk, baskets laden with salts, herbs, and linens. Through the night, muffled chants echoed from the Crow cabin, words in a tongue that twisted the air, evoking the ancient Gaelic of their forebears mixed with Cherokee incantations. Come morning, the coffin was nailed shut, but when the pallbearers lifted it, it felt hollow, as if filled with nothing but echoes. The weight of sin lifted. Eliza murmured cryptically when questioned, her lips curling in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The villagers nodded uneasily, burying Jebediah on the hilltop, where the wind could carry his soul unhindered. But whispers grew. Had the body shrunk? Was it even there? And in the weeks that followed, more deaths came. A cave-in at the mine claimed 3 souls. A fever swept through the children. Each time the sisters were summoned, and each time the coffins lightened. Picture the scene. The hollow at twilight, lanterns bobbing like willow, the wisps as mourners trudged up the path to the graveyard. The earth, rich and loamy, parted easily under shovels, but the coffins descended with an unnatural ease, thudding softly like empty crates. Families wept, but beneath the grief lurked dread. What ritual did the sisters perform in the dead of night? Did they feed the dead, as the rumors claimed, offering bread soaked in blood or something far worse, to ease their passage? As summer waned, the hollow's isolation deepened. Storms lashed the mountains, washing out roads and swelling creeks into raging torrents. Cut off from the outside world, the villagers turned inward, their suspicions festering. Young Silas Harper, a miner with a keen eye and a skeptical mind, began to watch the sisters' cabin. From his perch in the woods, he saw flickering candlelight through cracked shutters, heard low moans that could have been wind or wailing. One night, emboldened by moonshine, he crept closer, peering through a gap. What he glimpsed chilled his blood. Eliza and Abigail bent over a shrouded form, their hands dipping into a bowl of dark, viscous liquid. They murmured incantations, feeding morsels to the corpse's lips. Bread, perhaps, or flesh, while shadows danced grotesquely on the walls. The body, once robust, seemed to deflate before his eyes, skin tightening over bones like parchment. Silas fled, heart pounding, but the image haunted him. Was it sin, eating? That ancient rite where a pauper consumed the deceased's transgressions? Or something more profane? The hook tightens here, listeners. For in Thorn's Hollow, the dead did not rest easy. Graves hummed at night, a low vibration felt through the soles of boots. And soon, the lightened coffins began to yield their secrets. Clawed lids from within, as if the buried clawed for escape. But no bodies were found disturbed, only emptiness, as if the earth itself had feasted. What had the sisters unleashed? Lean in, for the tale deepens, and the shadows creep closer. Now, let us plunge into the heart of the narrative, where the threads of fate weave a tapestry of terror. Picture Thorn's Hollow in the grip of 1878's relentless summer, the air heavy with the buzz of cicadas and the metallic scent of impending rain. The mountains loomed like silent sentinels, their slopes cloaked in dense forests where sunlight pierced only in fleeting shafts, illuminating patches of ferns and forgotten graves. The hollow itself was a narrow valley, carved by unes of water and wind, home to perhaps 50 souls scattered in ramshackle cabins of log and chink. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, carrying the aroma of cornbread and stew, but beneath it lingered the ever-present odor of decay. The rot of leaves, the mustiness of earth turned for burials. At the hollow's edge stood the Thorn cabin, a squat structure of weathered oak, its roof sagging under the weight of moss and time. Vines clung to its walls like possessive lovers, and a single chimney puffed sporadically, as if the fire within struggled for life. Here dwelt Eliza and Abigail, bound by blood and something darker. Eliza, the dominant force, rose before dawn each day, foraging for ginseng and sassafras in the misty woods. Her knowledge of herbs was legendary. She could brew a poultice to mend broken bones or a tea to induce visions. But her true calling emerged in the presence of death. The mountains demand tribute, she would say, her voice a rumble like distant thunder. Abigail, in contrast, was the vessel, the one who communed with the unseen. From childhood, she had suffered fits, collapsing into trances where she spoke in tongues, foretelling deaths or locating lost livestock. The villagers regarded her with a mix of awe and fear, crossing paths to avoid her gaze. Together, the sisters formed an unbreakable duo, their bond forged in the crucible of loss. Their parents, Josiah and Miriam Thorne, had perished in the Great Fever of 1868, leaving the girls to inherit the family lore. Josiah, a miner-turned-recluse, had delved into forbidden texts, tattered grimoires smuggled from the old world, whispering of rituals to appease the hungry dead. The inciting calamity struck in March of 1878, when the first mine shaft in nearby Blackridge collapsed, entombing 7 men under tons of rock and coal. The hollow reverberated with wails as families gathered at the mouth, lanterns flickering in the driving rain. Rescue efforts yielded only mangled corpses, their faces frozen in eternal agony. The sisters arrived unbidden, cloaked in black, their baskets brimming with shrouds and salts. "We will prepare them," Eliza declared to the grieving kin, her tone brooking no argument. The villagers, numb with shock, acquiesced. That night, in the dim confines of the community barn, repurposed as a makeshift morgue, the sisters worked their craft. The air was thick with the coppery tang of blood and the acrid bite of lie. Bodies lay on rough, hewn tables, limbs akimbo, eyes staring blankly at the rafters. Eliza hummed a dirge, an ancient melody that slithered through the mind like smoke, while Abigail anointed each forehead with oil infused with nightshade. They washed the flesh meticulously, whispering incantations over each wound. But then came the feeding, a ritual veiled in secrecy. From a hidden pouch, Eliza produced loaves of bread, dark and dense, baked with ingredients unknown. "To absorb the sins," she murmured, placing morsels on the cold lips, urging them down with gentle pressure. Abigail chanted, her voice rising in pitch, invoking spirits to lighten the burden. Hours passed, the candles guttering low. By dawn, the bodies were shrouded, coffins assembled from pine planks felled in the hollow's woods. When the pallbearers, strong-armed miners like Silas Harper, hoisted the first, a gasp rippled through the crowd. It lifted effortlessly, as if the man inside had evaporated. "By God, what's happened?" muttered Elias Crow, Jebediah's son, his face ashen. Eliza met his gaze steadily. "The weight of the world has been lifted. The dead are fed, their souls unencumbered." The procession wound up the hill to the graveyard, a plot of stony ground dotted with wooden markers. Shovels bit into the earth, the scent of fresh soil mingling with pine resin. As the coffins lowered, a peculiar lightness settled over the mourners, not relief, but unease. That night, around hearths, stories spread. Had the sisters performed the sin, eating right, consuming the bread themselves to take on the deceased's transgressions? Or was it something else, feeding the dead to appease a ravenous entity lurking in the mountains? As spring bloomed into summer, deaths mounted. A cholera outbreak, born from tainted creek water, claimed the young and old alike. Little Mary Fletcher, barely 10, withered away in fevered delirium, her final words a plea for the hungry ones. The sisters tended her, their ritual repeating. Again, the coffin floated like a feather, and whispers evolved into accusations. Silas Harper, haunted by his vigil, confided in the village elder, Reverend Harlan Graves, a stern man with a Bible worn from fervent use. "They're witches," Silas hissed, his eyes wild. "I saw them feeding something unnatural." The Reverend, a product of the Hollow's insular faith, preached fire and brimstone, warning of demonic influences in the hills. Yet even he hesitated to confront the sisters, for their herbs had saved lives. and their knowledge of the old ways warded off greater evils. Instead, he urged vigilance, covering mirrors and stopping clocks at each death to trap no errant souls. But the lightness persisted. Coffins, once burdensome with the solidity of flesh, now seemed hollow shells. Graves hummed at midnight, a vibration that set dogs howling and children weeping in their sleep. One fateful evening, as thunderheads gathered over the peaks, a storm unleashed its fury. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the hollow in stark flashes. In the chaos, young widow Clara Vance lost her husband to a falling tree. Desperate, she summoned the sisters. They arrived drenched, their cloaks flapping like raven wings. In the Vance cabin, lit by a single lantern, they prepared the body. Clara, peering from the shadows, witnessed the right Eliza kneading dough with blood from the wound, Abigail intoning words that curdled the air. The bread was placed, consumed by the corpse. No, by the sisters themselves, their faces ecstatic in the flickering light. But as they ate, a shadow stirred, a formless presence that lightened the room, drawing substance from the flesh. Clara fled into the rain, her screams lost in the gale. By morning, the coffin was light, and Clara vanished, her cabin empty save for a plate of crumbs. The hollow trembled. The sisters' secret was unraveling, thread by bloody thread. The tension built like the pressure before a cave-in. Villagers avoided the thorn path, crossing themselves at mentions of the sisters. Yet death called them forth again and again. In July, a feud between the Harpers and Crows erupted in gunfire, leaving 2 dead. The sisters' ritual repeated, coffins light as air. Silas, driven by grief for his brother, resolved to expose them. Creeping to their cabin under cover of night, he heard chants mingled with guttural moans. Peering in, he saw horrors' bodies not fully dead, or spirits manifesting, feeding ravenously. The narrative coils tighter listeners. For in the depths of that summer, the fed dead began to stir, their lightness a curse that bound them to the earth. Graves cracked, and ethereal figures wandered the woods, translucent, hungering the sisters, guardians or perpetrators. The tale darkens further. As the veil thins, we delve deeper into the abyss, where the lightness of coffins conceals a heavier truth. August 1878 draped Thorns Hollow in a suffocating heat, the air shimmering like a mirage over parched fields. Cicadas droned incessantly, a maddening chorus underscoring the growing dread. The sisters' cabin, once a beacon of reluctant aid, now loomed like a crypt, its windows dark eyes watching the valley. Eliza and Abigail moved through the days with mechanical precision, their faces etched with fatigue. Or was it satiation? The conflicts escalated with the disappearance of Clara Vance. Search parties combed the woods, their torches casting elongated shadows that danced mockingly among the trees. The scent of pine and wet earth filled the air, but no trace emerged, only a faint, sweet rot lingering near the sisters' door. Reverend Graves, his sermons laced with accusations, rallied the villagers. "The devil walks among us," he thundered from his makeshift pulpit, a stump in the clearing. "Beware the feeders of the dead." Yet fear paralyzed action. The sisters' lineage invoked ancient taboos, and their rituals, though twisted, seemed to stem the tide of unrest. Silas Harper, consumed by vengeance, became the catalyst. His brother's death in the feud, shot down in a moonlit ambush, fueled his resolve. They fed him, he muttered to anyone who listened, describing visions of the sisters devouring sin-laden bread, their eyes glowing with unholy fire. One night, fortified by whiskey's false courage, he rallied a small band, Jebediah's son, Elias Crow, and 2 miners scarred by the cave-in. Armed with rifles and lanterns, they approached the cabin under a starless sky. The air was thick, oppressive, carrying the distant rumble of thunder. As they neared, a low hum emanated from within, a vibration that set teeth on edge. Peering through the shutters, they beheld a scene from nightmares. Eliza and Abigail encircled a fresh corpse, that of old widow Hargrove, who had succumbed to age that very day. Candles flickered, casting grotesque shadows. The sisters chanted in unison, their voices weaving a tapestry of sound that twisted the soul. From a cauldron bubbled a stew, dark, viscous, redolent of herbs and something metallic. "The feeding," Silas whispered, his breath fogging the glass. They watched as Eliza sliced bread, dipping it into the brew, placing it upon the widow's lips. But then, the horror deepened. The corpse stirred, not with life, but with an unnatural animation. Mouth opening, it consumed the offering, body deflating like a punctured bladder. Flesh melted away, bones gleaming white, until only a skeleton remained, light as driftwood. Abigail, trance-like, ate the remnants, her face contorted in ecstasy or agony. The men burst in, rifles raised. "Witches!" Silas bellowed. Chaos ensued. Eliza whirled, her eyes blazing. "Fools! You know not what you interrupt!" A struggle followed. Shots fired, lanterns shattered. Abigail fell wounded, blood pooling like ink. In the melee, the corpse animated fully, rising with jerky motions, its skeletal hands clutching at the intruders. Elias screamed as bony fingers raked his flesh, drawing blood that sizzled on the floor. They fled into the night, the cabin ablaze behind them. Flames licked the sky, illuminating the hollow in hellish light, but the sisters emerged unscathed. Or so it seemed. Abigail's wound healed overnight, a miracle or malediction. The villagers, awakened by the inferno, gathered in terror. Graves pronounced exorcism, but the damage was done. The fed dead, lightened of flesh, now roamed free. Hauntings intensified. At dusk, ethereal figures drifted through the woods. Jebediah Crow, his form translucent, lungs heaving as if still choked by dust. Little Mary Fletcher skipped among the trees, her laughter echoing hollowly, beckoning children to join her. Coffins, unearthed in panic, revealed emptiness, no bodies, only scraps of shroud and faint scratches from within, as if the interred had clawed not for escape, but in ravenous hunger. The sisters retreated to the mountains, their cabin's ruins smoking like a pyre. Whispers claimed they communed with an ancient entity, the Mountain Devourer, a spirit born of Cherokee legends and Scots-Irish curses, hungering for sins embodied in flesh. To appease it, they fed the dead, lightening bodies by consuming essence, but the ritual backfired, binding souls to the earth. Silas, tormented by visions, sought them out. Climbing mist-shrouded peaks, he found their refuge, a cave mouth yawning like a maw. Inside, torches illuminated walls etched with runes. Eliza confronted him, woofied to free them. The mountains demand payment. Abigail, pale and prophetic, revealed the truth. Their ancestor Eloan had bound the family to the Devourer, an entity that feasted on sin to prevent greater calamities. Plagues, collapses. But the feeding required proxies. The sisters ate the bread, absorbing sins, lightening the dead for ascension. Yet, with each rite, the entity grew stronger, demanding more. In a climactic confrontation, Silas fired, but the bullet passed through Eliza like smoke. The cave trembled, shadows coalescing into forms, the fed dead hungering. They descended upon him, light fingers stripping flesh, leaving him lightened, a husk. His scream echoed through the hollow, a warning unheeded. As autumn leaves fell like bloodied confetti, the hauntings peaked. Villagers fled, abandoning cabins to the encroaching wilderness. The sisters vanished, but legends persisted. On moonless nights, coffins rise light from graves and two figures wander, feeding the restless dead. The tale lingers, listeners, a chill in the bone. What price freedom from sin? The shadows deepen. To fully grasp the macabre essence of our tale, we must excavate the historical bedrock of Appalachia in 1878, where fact and folklore entwine like roots in rocky soil. The Appalachian Mountains, that vast chain stretching from Alabama to New York, have long been a crucible of cultures. A place where indigenous traditions collide with immigrant superstitions, birthing a unique tapestry of dread and devotion. In 1878, the region stood on the cusp of transformation, its ancient rhythms disrupted by the encroaching iron rails and coal barons, yet clinging fiercely to rituals that echoed through centuries. Consider the landscape: rugged peaks, deep hollows, and impenetrable forests where sunlight filters through canopies like divine judgment. The Blue Ridge, home to Thorn's Hollow in our narrative, was part of the Southern Appalachians, inhabited by descendants of Scots, Irish settlers who arrived in the 18th century, fleeing persecution and seeking solace in isolation. These hardy folk brought with them a baggage of beliefs, fairies, witches, and the restless dead. from the Celtic fringes, mingled with Cherokee influences despite the Trail of Tears scars in 1838. Remnants of native law persisted. Spirits of the land, hungry for respect, punishing desecration with calamity. 1878 marked pivotal events. The discovery of Luray Caverns in Virginia that year unveiled subterranean wonders, but also evoked fears of underworld realms where the dead dwelled. In North Carolina and Tennessee, Cherokee survivors secured land titles, preserving fragments of their culture amid white encroachment. Meanwhile, industrialization dawned. Coal mining boomed, with shafts delving into the earth like graves. Cave-ins, like the one in our story, were commonplace, claiming lives and fueling superstitions about mountain spirits exacting tolls. Death rituals in 19th century Appalachia were intimate, communal affairs steeped in eeriness. Bodies were prepared at home, washed by family or specialists like our sisters. Mirrors covered to prevent soul entrapment, clocks stopped to freeze time, cats banished lest they jump over the corpse, turning it vampiric. Wakes, sitting up with the dead, lasted days, with mourners vigilantly watching for signs of life, born from fears of premature burial. Safety coffins with bells attached via strings allowed the dead to signal awakening. Scratch marks in exhumed caskets a grim testament. Central to our tale is sin-eating, a rite with Welsh roots transplanted to Appalachia. A sin-eater, often a marginalized figure, consumed bread and all placed on the corpse, absorbing transgressions to ensure heavenly passage. In remote hollows, this evolved. Plates of salt and earth on chests symbolized bodies' return to elements, but some accounts whisper of blood, mingled offerings, tying to cannibalistic folklore. Cherokee beliefs in Octena, serpentine spirits devouring souls, blended, creating hybrid horrors. Coffin superstitions abounded. Light coffins foretold unrest, heavy ones burdened sins. Burials on hilltops prevented flooding, but also elevated souls closer to heaven, or exposed them to winds carrying ghosts. Graves hummed, perhaps seismic echoes, but folklore attributed it to unsettled dead. Family ghost stories, like those of granny witches, healers with supernatural gifts, mirrored our sisters. Tales of the Bone Lady or searching widows with torches evoked post-battle hauntings from the Civil War, scars fresh in 1878. Cultural trauma underpins this isolation-bred insularity, feuds like the Hatfields' McCoys simmering. Famine, disease, cholera outbreaks in the 1870s amplified death's presence. Folklore served as coping rituals, warded evil but twisted. Birth monsters, our story's mountain devourer, echoes Appalachian cryptids, the wampus cat or Mothman precursors, entities hungering amid human folly. Blend fact mining disasters in 1878 analogues like Pennsylvania collapses highlight peril. Cherokee sin cleansing rites paralleled European ones, fostering authenticity, yet eerie accounts of empty graves attributed to body snatchers fueled legends of consumed dead. This context unsettles listeners. In 1878, Appalachia death was not endpoint but threshold, rituals bridges to the abyss. Our tale, rooted here, blurs lines, leaving us questioning, were the sisters saviors or summoners? Peeling back the layers of our macabre tale reveals a labyrinth of symbols and psyches, where the lightness of coffins belies the weight of human frailty. At its core, the sisters who fed the dead taps universal fears, the dread of unfinished business, the hunger of the grave, and the corrosive bond of family. In the ominous glow of analysis, we see not mere horror, but a mirror to cultural traumas and the shadowy recesses of the soul. Symbolically, the light coffins embody denial, a literal unburdening that mocks mortality. In Appalachian lore, weight signifies substance. Sins anchor the soul, demanding atonement. The sisters' ritual, feeding to lighten, perverts this, suggesting absolution through consumption. Bread, staple of life, becomes vessel for death. Blood infused, it evokes cannibalism, a taboo echoing global myths like Wendigo, hunger turning humans monstrous. The devourer, that eldritch entity, symbolizes nature's rapacity. Mountains, ancient and indifferent, devour men in mines demanding tribute. Lightness, illusionary freedom, souls trapped in limbo, haunting as ethereal husks. Psychologically, the sisters' incarnate duality, Elisa the ID, primal, commanding Abigail the superego, prophetic, tormented. Their bond, forged in isolation, reflects Freudian undercurrents, repressed grief manifesting as ritual compulsion. Feeding the dead, projection of inner voids, consuming sins to fill emotional hollows. Silas's obsession mirrors collective paranoia, the outsider challenging the arcane only to succumb. Hauntings represent return of the repressed, societal sins exploitation, feuds manifesting as ghosts, thematically universal fears converge, death's inevitability, twisted by denial. In 1878, amid industrialization, old ways clashed with progress, rituals preserved identity against erasure. Cultural trauma, Appalachia's marginalization, stereotyped as backward, echoes in the hollow's insularity. Hunger, literal famines and metaphorical spiritual void drives the narrative. Feeding appeases but perpetuates cycle, critiquing how societies consume themselves. Human nature's darkness mercy morphs to monstrosity. Sisters begin as healers, but power corrupts. Rituals addicting. Connects to archetypes. Witch sisters in folklore, Hansel Gretel inversions, embody feminine mystique feared by patriarchy. Ominous tone, what if we all feed the dead? Burying guilts, lightening loads at cost to soul. Intellectually, the story probes authenticity. Blending fact, folklore unsettles, questioning reality. Leaves us haunted, our shadows behind us, our own sins. Lightened yet lingering. As our descent concludes, the mists of thorns hollow recede, but the chill lingers, a spectral caress on the nape. We have traversed 1878 shadowed paths where sisters fed the dead, coffins lightened, and souls hungered eternally. Eliza and Abigail, guardians or gluttons, vanish into legend, their ritual a cautionary echo. In appeasing darkness, we invite it home. Yet questions persist. What if the devourer stirs still? In modern hollows where minds scar the earth, do light graves hum, awaiting feeders? Listen to the wind, it whispers their names. The shadow behind you lengthens. Dare you turn?